so tough about it, is like you look at abortion. It's you can pretend it's a virtuous, heroic thing, but everyone who's not insane goes, yeah,
Right.
but is it?
Right.
You can pretend that child mutilation is a good idea, but then you have people like Chloe Cole and other awesome, courageous people come out and go, I regret that this happened to me, and the parents might regret it too, hopefully. Yeah, but I see what you mean, because it's like the initial layer of abortion and transgenderism, to me at least, just stinks. It's disgusting.
Right.
And then you have to try to put lipstick on that pig.
Right.
But with IVF, it's like you see the lipstick first, and then you realize it's a pig. Do you see the difference?
Yes.
And,
It seems so good to want children.
And so I think that's the thing is, like we were talking earlier in our conversation, most people either don't have the time or they're distracting themselves to death such that they can't think at any great length or depth on a particular topic. And so when it comes to IVF, I think a lot of people just aren't interested in thinking deeply about it, and they stay at the lipstick level, which is, this is a scientific method that can help people have children who otherwise couldn't.
Yes. And
so what do we do about that?
Even when they're in that situation, they allow themselves to be misled, like by saying things like, oh, yeah, we have 15 eggs frozen, when they actually have 15 embryos frozen. And that's a big difference. One is a part and the other one is a whole human person. So even the language that sometimes our own people who pursue IVF will use is language that's inaccurate, that makes them therefore not feel convicted that anything wrong is going on here, because they've merely frozen a part of a human, which again, we could call into question, but it's very different from freezing a whole human. So I think we need to do widespread education on this. I mean, it's why I wrote the book, but it's my hope that from the pulpit, our pastors, our priests will speak to this issue, because they're already being asked about it. Please
buy this book, priests who are watching.
Yes, and use it. So one of the things I wanted to do in the book too is, I mean, we've talked very heady and intellectually, like the craziness of pursuing IVF in the culture and what it can lead to. But I really wanted to get across is an acknowledgement of the profound suffering that is infertility. And I have a number of friends that have faced that reality and carried that cross. And I asked them if I could interview them. So there are a number of interviews I've included in the book. Some friends ultimately conceived, some friends never did. In fact, one of my favorite stories is a friend who I, in the book, named Bethany, who never conceived. And back to what we were talking about as idols, she realized early on in their infertility journey that she was putting having a child as an idol. And she goes, the moment I dealt with that, everything changed. And I was able to accept not having children. And she has been pretty much most of her adult life, and still is, involved in a very significant ministry. If I named the ministry, you would know it. It's all around the world. And she shares just this beautiful testimony of how she has countless spiritual children who love the Lord all around the world, because God has used her in her quote unquote barrenness biologically to produce a spiritual fruitfulness that is more children than any physical biological mother could ever have. And so dealing with the fact that she turned having children into an idol, rejecting that, asking God for a right ordered perspective. She talks about how she doesn't live anymore with what we were talking about, a disordered sorrow, a deep-seated depressive sadness that she doesn't have something she really wants, because she actually has what she really wants, which is maternity. And it's just so beautiful to read about. But I do share the stories of some friends who pursued what I would describe as ethical responses to infertility. IVF just completely ignores the problem and finds an alternative method to manufacture someone into existence. Whereas what I talk about in the book as an alternative is restorative reproductive medicine. In the Catholic world, we often talk about NAPR technology and Creighton technology, but all of it comes under this umbrella of RRM, restorative reproductive medicine. And the idea is, let's restore the reproductive system to its natural functioning. You're not meant to have babies after menopause, but you are meant to have them after puberty and before menopause. So if you can't conceive in this window when you naturally should, Shalom says, let's try to restore your reproductive powers. What's wrong with the man that can be corrected physiologically? What's wrong with the woman that can be corrected physiologically? So as I mentioned, there's an ovarian wedge resection surgery that can happen for people who have PCOS. A friend of mine had that surgery and has had 4 live births. She's also had a couple miscarriages, but 4 babies she never would have had that she's raising to this day because of restorative reproductive medicine. Friends of mine who have, the wife has endometriosis and stage 4 endometriosis, super severe and advanced. And she and her husband eventually conceived. Friends of mine who pursued fostering, friends who pursued adoption, some who pursued adoption thinking they would never have their own biological children. And in the end, they did conceive naturally. And so now they have this beautiful blended family of adoptive and biological children, but some who've only adopted because they never truly were able to conceive. There are some conditions that can't be corrected. And that is hard when you're not, when you reject IVF and you try to pitch restorative reproductive medicine as an alternative, as I do, there still is that aspect I have to be honest about and say, it doesn't work for everyone. Not all physical woundedness can be healed in this world, as we know with cancer and other things too. So it doesn't work for everyone, which is why we have to get the right mindset. And we have to make sure we haven't idolized having a spouse, having a child, whatever other issues going on in our heart, as you alluded to in your own life, whatever that thing is. And I quote John Piper, he's actually a Reformed evangelical, but he talks about idols. He goes, whatever the thing is, whether it's music, whether it's sex, whether it's having children, it's you put it ahead of God and you put your happiness to that thing instead of God. And God has to be our source of happiness. We have to remember we are not made for this world. We are pilgrims on a journey going to heaven, and that is where we will have no more tears. That is where we'll be happy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so the opposite is true. If I believe heaven ought to be had here, then is it any wonder I get so angry, or why people get so depressed when they can't make Eden work? Yeah. What is a right? And why do people have a right to a baby? There's a lot of talk about rights, and I'm not sure people know what they mean when they say it. So what is a right?
Yeah. I had to define it. I would say
Hallow is the #1 prayer app. Why haven't you got it yet? Download it right now. Go to hallow.com/Matt Fradd.
A right is something you can claim to. You have a claim to. So if you want to attack me, I can rightfully say, no pun intended, I have a right to life. Life is something that's mine, and you wanting to attack me is to take that from me. I have a claim to it, you don't. So that's violating my right to life. So then, if we say we have a right to a child, then we're saying, I can claim that. But if we get back to a child, like an adult, is a human being, a human person, and by virtue of that is a subject and not an object, can I say I have a claim to another person? If we think about, and I write about this in the book, just to understand the point, if we were to think, why is slavery wrong? Why do we reject it? Is we say, well, it's one human person looking at another human person saying, I own you. I have a right to you. I can claim you as something that's mine, that I possess. And so then we take a relationship of equality and we create inequality where one is superior and one is inferior. And so we rightly reject slavery because we say, you don't have a right to another person. We're equals. You can't possess another. And so if that's true in the context of slavery, it's true in all other contexts. That's why when I talk about the desire for a spouse, there are moral means to pursue that desire. You could go on setups. You could do online dating. You could do speed dating. You could just live your life and meet people wherever you are and find a spouse. But then I cite there's also an immoral way to pursue the desire for a spouse, and that's human trafficking. And I cite the example of China, where for decades, because there was a one-child policy in a culture that preferred and prefers males to females, you have a profound imbalance now, decades later in China, even where they've tried to increase it to, is it 2-child policy or maybe 3 now, but there still is this idea of the government can limit. But regardless, back because you had decades of a 1-child policy, you have a bunch of girls that were aborted or victims of infanticide because parents wanted the boy. So now Some estimates I've seen have said there are 35 million more men than women in China. So as a Canadian, someone who has lived in Canada, you'll know that roughly the Canadian population is about 35 million. Maybe it's around 40 now. But imagine if every single human being in Canada right now was male. That's the sheer number of excess men to women in China, which means there are a whole bunch of men who will never find wives that they desire. So what's happening? Well, some men in China are pursuing human trafficking, and there are these whole elaborate networks both within China as well as involving women in Cambodia and Vietnam, where they're being trafficked into forced marriages. And I've watched some documentaries where this one guy, before it showed that he had essentially trafficked a wife from Cambodia, your heart breaks for this man. He's just a young guy working in a largely male-dominated village who just wants a companion who's not a man, who wants a wife. And your heart breaks as he talks about feeling inadequate as a man, as a human being. And but then the story goes on, and you see he has now essentially purchased a woman, and she's come in, doesn't speak the language. All the other people in the village are gawking at her. And you're like, I felt pity for this man, and I still do. But this is really wrong, and now you've got a victim here. So you could say he's a victim of his culture by living in this imbalanced world, but now he's chosen his victim to become victimizer. So now a new person is introduced to the picture who's now a victim. And whether the person who steals the woman and makes her a wife is quote unquote kind or overtly abusive, as some of the stories I read were just total nightmares. This one woman was trafficked in and forced to have sex multiple times a day. And she was at one point, I think 6 days postpartum with a child that he'd impregnated her with. And he was beating her because she refused to have sex with him. I mean, horrifying stories. So if you can find a man who says, well, I'm not that, right? You could find a man who says, I wouldn't do that, but I've still trafficked in a woman and she's still forced to be my wife. It's still wrong.
Yeah, it's like the kind slave owner versus the abusive slave owner. It's
right.
One is better, but better doesn't mean good. Or one's less bad, we should say.
Right, less bad. So all that to say, can I have compassion for the person who desires the spouse? Yes. And are there ethical ways to try to address that desire being fulfilled? Yes. But there's a glaring, obvious, unethical path over here, and we got to shine a red light. Stop. Do not go forward. So the same then is true analogously when we're talking about the desire for a child. Is that good and ordered? Yes. Are there ethical means to try to make that happen? Yes. Correct underlying infertility issues and so forth. But if those don't work, or if we just ignore them entirely and we want to go down this path of manufacturing humans into existence by involving a third party, glaring red light. We have to say, no, stop, do not go forward. But it's hard, as you say, because it's an ordered desire. Having a spouse, having a child are ordered, whereas I don't want to be pregnant anymore. That's obviously, disordered. I don't want the physiology of the sex of my body that matches my DNA, making me XX versus XY. I don't want this part anymore. That's obviously disordered. And so these other ones that are more ordered can make us feel a little differently, but it doesn't follow that just because we feel a little differently and feel a little better, that the pursuit of this particular path is in any way an ethical pursuit.
Thanks very much for watching that clip. You can click the link below if you want to watch the full interview, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.